Hi everybody, I'm Katie Schuler, and today I'm going to tell you how to set up Xbuilder Deployer on your server. So there's a couple of prerequisites. If you haven't already watched the video on how to set up your server and create a domain name and then point your domain name to your server, you should watch that one. But if you've already done that, you should be ready to go. So just really quickly, it's really important that you've done the step where you point your domain name to your server. So you do that by creating two A records. One is by using hostname @ and then redirecting to your server. That will say anytime anyone comes to our address, this hellohappypeople.com domain name, please send them to our server. And then the wildcard says anybody who comes to any subdomain of hellohappypeople.com, like docs.hellohappypeople.com, email.hellohappypeople.com, whatever, please also send them to the server. Because we're actually going to Xbuilder Deployer is going to handle all of these requests coming in and then send them where they need to go. Okay, so we've already got that set up here, so we can go ahead and SSH into our server. And I'm going to clear all of this stuff. We're in the server. So remember, we want to check that we have Docker because we're going to need that. We're also going to need Docker Compose. And we're going to need Git. So we can just check that we have these things before we keep going. Great. So we have everything we need to get Xbuilder Deployer. So the simplest thing to do to get Xbuilder Deployer is to just clone the whole repository. It's really small. It's just a Docker Compose file. So we can clone the whole repo. There we go, ls, and now we have a repository, or we have a directory called deployer. So let's cd into that directory. Okay, and then the instructions say we should do an initial configuration. So what we need to do, let's just do ls so we can see in here. We have a couple of files, really just the Docker Compose file, and there's actually an environment file in there. So what we want to do is copy the environment file .env.sample, and then we want to copy it to a file called .env. So Docker Compose knows to look for a .env file by default, but it's not a good idea to commit .env files to repositories. They should only stay on your local computer. They're a way of telling Docker and Docker Compose about the environment that it's in. So we can go ahead and copy that. And then if we want to edit this file, so if we were on our home computer, we could use just any file navigator, GUI, we could click on it, open it, and edit it, but we can't do that here. So the way you can edit files simply on a server is nano.env. So let's go and edit the file we just created. So we copied the sample environment file. It comes with just 2 passwords. And what we can do here is just change them to whatever we want. So I'm just going to change them to change me, just for demonstration purposes. They don't matter. You can set them to whatever you want. You probably want to make them more powerful than this, but they'll exist in this file, and these variables will get passed on to Docker Compose when it spins up Xbuilder Deployer. Okay, then you can hit Control X, and then yes, Y for yes, and enter to save. So now we've saved that environment variable. So now we're ready to start Xbuilder Deployer. So to start the containers, you can use Docker Compose upd. It's really important that you're inside the deployer directory. That's where the Docker Compose file is living, and Docker needs to look for that file inside the directory. So press enter, and then Docker is going to create these containers, the containers for Xbuilder Deployer. So they're getting pulled down. This can take a few minutes the very first time it builds, but the rest of the times you do it, the containers will come up fast. You actually probably want the containers to always be running. They're set up to be always running. You don't really want to ever bring them down once you set them up, because what Xbuilder Deployer is doing is creating an Nginx proxy manager that will receive requests coming into hellohappypeople.com and then route them to the right place. So let's wait momentarily while this is all set up. Okay, so some containers are being created. Next we can do a couple of commands. So Xbuilder Deployer should have created a container or a Docker network called Xbuilder Deployer. So we can check to make sure that happened by using docker network list. And we can see that the Xbuilder deployer network was created as a bridge. So inside Xbuilder experiment projects, the deploy Docker Compose files are set up to look for this network. So they're going to try to attach to this network so that the containers can talk to each other, and so our Nginx proxy manager can actually direct traffic to those other containers. Okay, so let's carry on. We can also make sure that our Docker containers are running, where we can see here. Let me just make this a little bigger. So we can see that we spun up 3 containers. Portainer, which isn't really important right now, I'll probably remove that one. Nginx Proxy Manager, which is really important, and then the Nginx Proxy Manager DB, that's the database that Nginx Proxy Manager uses. Okay, great. So now that we have our containers, we can visit our server. So let's go ahead and visit our server's IP address. I'm just going to copy it there. Great. So you've set up Nginx Proxy Manager, and I should have tried to go to the server's address beforehand and nothing would have happened because we had nothing on our server. But now we have Nginx Proxy Manager running, and so this landing page tells us that it's actually arrived. So the next thing we want to do is go to port 81. So Nginx Proxy Manager we're self-hosting it now on our own server, and we can access it at port 81. So we're going to do that. When you first log in, you can do admin@example.com, and then the password is change.me. That's a coincidence that it's what I changed the database passwords to. This just is the default login that comes with Nginx Proxy Manager. So we can log in here, and now the first thing that's going to happen is you'll be asked to change your username. So I'll set my email, and then also your password. The current password again is change.me. You're going to set a new password, and then hit save. Oops, I tried to cheat and make it a little short. Okay, so and then we'll save, and now we'll be logged in. Great, so I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so you can see the options. Okay, so if you're following along with the Xbuilder instructions, the next thing we want to do is secure our Nginx Proxy Manager. So we are self-hosting this. That means that this is being delivered from a container on your server. So no data is leaving your server or being passed anywhere else. So we could just continue to manage things this way, where you just go to your IP address and then to the port, and then you can do Nginx Proxy Manager that way. But we can actually demonstrate how useful Nginx Proxy Manager is by creating a subdomain for itself. So what we're going to do is go to hosts, and then proxy hosts, and we're going to add a proxy host. Okay, so let's create a domain name. I'm going to create the subdomain manage.hellohappypeople.com. Now, I don't have to do any work for the subdomain because with DigitalOcean and whatever DNS service you're using, we've already created a wildcard that's sending any subdomain to our server. So then that request is now arriving at Nginx Proxy Manager, and then this is what we're doing now, is telling it, okay, now look at exactly what you got and where should I send that. So we can set our forwarding host to Nginx Proxy Manager on port 81. The reason we can do that is because everything on our server, everything that's connected to Nginx Proxy Manager is on our Xbuilder deployer network. So we can actually refer to these Docker containers by name. So all I'm doing here, I'm just making this bigger so you can see, is I'm actually pulling the name of this container to say that when people come to, so when they come to Hello Happy People, send them to our IP. Then when they arrive, they land at the Nginx Proxy Manager, and then we can parse that further and say, okay, if they've asked for manage.hellohappypeople, send them to this container. And this container listens on port 81. So we want to block common exploits. That's just a good practice. And then we want to encrypt our data. So data that's going in or out, we can get an Ssl certificate to do that. It's super easy with Nginx Proxy Manager. You just hit request new. You can hit force SSL, HTTP2 support, HSTS enabled, and then I agree. and my email's already in there. We can hit save. So this will take a minute to happen because it's requesting the SSL certificate from Let's Encrypt. And now we have Nginx Proxy Manager with an SSL cert, Let's Encrypt, that's available at this address. So we can check if it worked by clicking on this. And when we do, it will take us to our Nginx Proxy Manager. So all we've done is now created this domain, this subdomain on our domain, and asked Nginx Proxy Manager to please send people who request this subdomain to our container. Yay! Okay, great. So there's one more thing we might want to do to secure our container, or to secure our Nginx Proxy Manager. So now anyone who visits manage.hellohappypeople.com can get to our landing page for our Proxy Manager. Now, they'd have to log in, so it's not like they could just go in and monkey with the stuff that we have by just visiting our site. But you might want it to be a bit more secure than that. You might want it to be impossible for anyone but the people you want to actually even visit this site and arrive at this landing page. So you can do that with Nginx Proxy Manager as well with an access list. So what you do is add an access list. I'm going to name it managers because those are going to be the people or IPs that I'm going to allow to access manage.hellohappypeople.com. It's an arbitrary name. I could have called it anything. And then for authorization, you can actually give a username and password. So I could give it, let's see, user password. And you can give access IPs. So you could actually get the IP of your computer, put it in here, and then only requests coming from that IP address would be allowed to access the Nginx Proxy Manager. So another thing you can do is click Satisfy Any. That means either the authorization or the access do. This could be really helpful if, for example, this is a use case I have. At home, I have a static IP, so I can put my home IP address in here, and then I never have to worry about logging in. I know it's just only letting me in at that IP address. But when I'm at work, my university has a dynamic IP, so it gets regenerated all the time, and it's super annoying to have to keep adding it here. So having this alternative and then selecting Satisfy Any makes a really simple way where I can just easily access from my university without having to open it up to all IPs. Okay, so we can hit save. Then we have to take one more step for it to apply to that particular site. So let's go back to our proxy hosts, and then over here we can hit this little button and then edit. So then we just take the access list and change it to the access list we just created, managers, for example, and hit save. Great. So now when we visit hellohappypeople.com, we'll be asked for a global password. Remember, we set it as user and password, not super secure. And then we'll be taken to the landing page. So it's just a little bit more secure. Okay, so that's all you have to do to set up Xbuilder Deployer. And what we're going to do when we deploy experiments is almost exactly the same thing we just did. We're going to create a subdomain and we're going to direct it to the container that experiment is running in. If you haven't already watched the overview video, it gives an overview of the structure so you can understand exactly what's happening. It might be helpful. But if you have, you probably are ready to move on to deploy your Xbuilder experiment.